Okay, welcome everybody. Shavua Tov. Welcome to a Sunday special from the Chabura. My name is Sina Kahen. I haven't co-hosted one of our shiurim for quite a while now, and I'm the co-founder of this wonderful global learning community. And it's really truly incredible to see how far we've come in the last 4 years, with over 2,000 students around the world, with over 1,000 hours of shiurim listened to each month, and 10 books that have been published, with many more on the way. And yet we've still only really scratched the surface. We have so many more initiatives, so many more projects planned in so many more countries, Be'ezrat Hashem. And as I say, I'm not often the host of our shiurim, so I really wanted to take the opportunity while I am to thank you all, the viewers, the listeners, people who are here, as well as the vast majority who are listening to the recording, who've helped us achieve these milestones, who've helped us get to where we are. And I also want to thank you for joining us today as we're exploring the intersection of Torah and science with two very distinguished guests. But before I introduce them, I actually wanted to provide context, as we usually do here at the Chabura, and to take us back to Sefer Shemot for just a moment, specifically Parashat Ki Tisa. We know that it's there that the Israelites have fashioned a golden calf, and Moshe is understandably enraged. He goes up to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu about this, and essentially to request forgiveness for his people's transgressions. And it's this very highly intimate and sensitive time and moment where Moshe makes a request, one of a couple, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we're going to focus on one particular one, where he states, Hodieni na et derachecha ve'eda acha. Let me know your ways so that I may know you. And we see in the Pesukim, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu replies, Ani a'abir kol tupi al panecha. I'm going to make my goodness, all my goodness, pass before you. Now, Harambam, in the Moreh HaNebuchim, provides us with a very beautiful and powerful observation of this interaction. Moshe is essentially asking to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways, his derachim, in order to know him. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he grants him this and says he can achieve this through kol to be. And Harambam asks, what is this kol to be? And he answers that it's referring to the entirety of creation. And how do we know that? Harambam states, because if we look in Bereshit, the pasuk states that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw all that he had made, and he saw that it was good. Kol tov. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was granting Moshe and us the ability to come to know him through the entirety of creation, through the study of his work, Maaseh Bereshit, which we know not only encompasses science, which we are discussing today, but so much more. Now, in the early days of the Chabura, we did encounter some pushback from certain corners of our wonderful religious community about including scientific topics in our curriculum. I'm sure some of you may remember that one of our first series by Rabbi Shemuel Liebens was on logic, the art of logic. So there was a pushback about having these scientific topics in our curriculum, and some questioned how science fits into a Bet Midrash. Surely science is a distraction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from Talmud Torah, was the argument. But we at the Chabura, as did our Sephardi Hachamim and communities for generations, view science not as a distraction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but an expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as our Rosh Bet Midrash, Rabbi Dweck, often reminds us. And even more than that, this approach wasn't about teaching science and philosophy under the category of chol or secular subjects in order to get with the times, to get into college, or to get a parnasah, but rather they were included as a means through which we come to achieve that which is essentially the chief objective of every single Jew. The first mitzvah in our treasure chest of mitzvot, Yediat Hashem, to know God. And as Mori Yosef Kafech, alav shalom, writes beautifully, studying science with this intention is considered kadosh, not chol. And in the words of the 13th century Hacham Yaakov Anatoli, we should climb the mountain of science and at the mountain you will find God. So in that spirit and context, let us climb this mountain with today's discussion, with the assistance of two rabbi scientists, with whom we are going to explore how modern scientific developments can inform our understanding of God's existence, can aid us in this mitzvah of Yediat Hashem, and even address challenges posed by contemporary theories such as the multiverse. We'll be discussing how science can enhance Torah learning and living, as it has done and will continue to do so. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our distinguished guests. As co-hosts of the popular Physics to God podcast, Rabbi Eli Feder and Rabbi Aharon Zimmer bring a blend of Torah scholarship and scientific expertise. Rabbi Feder, a professor specializing in graph theory with a PhD in mathematics, and Rabbi Zimmer, with a background in physics and commodity futures trading, have dedicated themselves to demonstrating how Torah and science are products of the same creator. Rabbi Feder, Rabbi Zimmer, welcome to the Chabura.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you.
I've been really excited for today. I've watched a few of your podcasts, but some of the material as well that's out there, not just from yourselves, but also from your great teacher. And I want to start really within that kind of area, asking you about the scientific background that you have and how it was that it shaped your understanding or arguments specifically for the existence of God.
Okay, well, once again, Sina, it's great to be here, and thank you for having us. And it's an amazing program you guys have put together here. For myself, I was raised as a modern Orthodox Jew in America, and I always felt this tension between Torah and religiosity and the modern world, the secular world, that came through secular knowledge and culture. And there is this underlying tension I feel like that was in the background. And in a certain sense, when I got older, I started to realize it's been in the background for a few hundred years, really, since maybe the Enlightenment. And growing up, I studied in yeshiva after high school for my Rabbi Yisrael Chait. And I also went to college. I got a physics degree, and I've always been trying to integrate and synthesize the ideas of Torah together with the ideas of science and philosophy and logic and psychology and the secular knowledge, and using it to illuminate certain ideas in the Torah that might not have been clear, and finding ways to resolve that tension. And I found that they've both really complemented each other. That specifically the methodology of Talmud, of learning the Brisker method, that my Rebbe learned from Rav Soloveitchik, who ultimately from Rav Soloveitchik's grandfather, the Chaim Soloveitchik, and learning that methodology has really helped me tremendously in terms of studying science, conceptual categories, analytical thinking, relationships, and I use it financially, how to trade markets through both physics and the Talmud. And also the science has really helped inform me in how to think about certain aspects of Torah. God's existence, obviously the primary one we're talking about today, but it's, there's a lot of things in the Torah that really have to be thought of in terms of what we know to be true through modern science. So it's definitely, Torah has really influenced how I look at science, and science has influenced how I think about Torah. And it's been a very productive, creative interplay of the two.
Okay, so I have, again, Aaron has a background in physics. I have a background in mathematics. So I guess in a certain sense, as you mentioned, my PhD was in something called braid group cryptography. I do research in an area called graph theory, and neither of those were directly related to physics. But at the same time, there's a famous quote by Galileo that the language of the universe is mathematics. And I feel like having a background, a strong background in mathematics, it's enabled me to really be able to plunge into the world of physics. And the two of us, again, we learned together for many years, maybe 20 plus years. And our primary learning is Gemara. For many years, we've been learning Gemara together. And Rambam mentions that there's davar katan and there's davar gadol, and a person always has to start with davar katan. The smaller matters are havayos abayos Rabbi, the discussions about Abai and Rabbi, like learning Gemara. And it's through learning Gemara that one is the doors open to be able to pursue deeper areas like science and seeing the Chachmas Hashem in science. And I feel like, again, we both have backgrounds in physics and in math, but we have backgrounds in Torah. And really, it's like we've been learning many, many sugyas in Gemara together. And then over the years, we've discussed sugyas of physics and science and philosophy and psychology. And I feel like our podcast, Physics de God, is in a certain sense the culmination of the results that we've put together when we analyze this area of science. And we could discuss something called fine-tuning and kind of how we've discovered through the tools, which, as the Rambam says, that learning Gemara is miyashvin daita sh'adam tchila, it like prepares a person's mind. It teaches you how to think carefully, critically, how to analyze an area. And through that, when we turned our attention towards physics and modern discoveries of physics, we've really discovered a path towards, as you were saying, towards the mitzvah of Yidiyas Hashem.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's, as I was saying to my fellow co-founder, Avi Garson, to be able to see this emerge, especially within an Ashkenazi environment, for me is amazing to see, because as I say, I mentioned before the call, here in the UK, it's not often that we find rabbi scientists. And to see that you've got two Hachamim who are excelling in both fields is truly an inspiration for so many of us. I still consider myself of the younger generation. So many of us in the younger generation, to see how you found those connections. I'd say one of the differences would only be with us, with the Sfaradim, is that we wouldn't necessarily have Gemara study as being such a core feature, because one has to master the arts of Mikra and Halacha before they get there. But that same concept of being able to utilize the study of those things to aid in the study of Torah is definitely a familiar, I'd say, thread that exists also in the Sephardi tradition. Now, when we look at particularly utilizing this scientific knowledge that you have, I would want to understand about the fine-tuning argument and how you, in your studies, in your estimations, feel that argument, and if you want to give a little basic overview, a layman's description of what that argument is, the fine-tuning argument, specifically when it's used for making the case for the existence of a creator. How would you present that?
Okay, well, we'll give it over in a very, there's different ways you can give it over. You can give over a really short way, which is what we'll do here. On the podcast, we go, it's a couple of 2-3 hours, the first 5 episodes on Physics to God, but let's do a quick one here. We'll start with the key point is to understand the fundamental laws of nature of physics. They have qualities and quantities. So a quality would be, for example, gravity. 2 masses attract each other. That's a qualitative relationship. The 2 things are attracted to each other. And the quantity would be how much they're attracted. How strong is the attraction? Or relative to, for example, when things are charged, like electrons, they repel each other. So how strong is the attraction of the electrons relative to how much they repel each other? And those numbers are called, they're always the same, the quantities. They're called constants of nature. How big an electron is, how heavy it is. It's the mass of an electron. It's always the same. It's a constant. How strong the attraction is by gravity or how strong the repulsion is by electromagnetism, it's always the same. It's a constant. And these constants play a critical role in understanding the universe. Insofar as physics are trying to understand everything and to unify science and reduce it to simple, basic principles and laws, they're trying to explain everything and trying to fit these constants into the framework of a theory of everything, a way to understand everything, presents a unique challenge to physicists. Go ahead, Owen.
Okay, so the problem is that when scientists are trying to understand everything about our universe, to reduce everything down to the most simple, basic laws, they hit a wall, if you will. There's a problem which Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of the previous century, said something, he called this like the greatest damn mystery of physics. And that is, how do you explain a number? He talked about there's these numbers, one number called a fine structure constant, which is related to what Aaron was talking about, the strength of electromagnetic force. And it's 1 over 137 and change. And this number is a number which he says is a mystery. How do you explain a number? We understand that we could explain everything in our universe is built on simpler and simpler and simpler laws, and it gets down to, currently we have quantum mechanics and general relativity is like at the core of the pursuit of simplicity of a unified theory. But despite these two beautiful laws, these qualitative sets of laws, you have 25 or so numbers. Like again, like a number 137.137.999, something like that. And numbers like the mass of an electron is 10 to the negative 1 to the 32 power. And you have these like ridiculous numbers, which are, how do you explain that? And that's what Feynman is saying. We want to explain everything, but at the same time, these numbers are totally the result of measurements. We cannot, there's no theory which explains these numbers. Every single time we weigh an electron, its mass is constant. It's a fixed number. Every time we look at the electromagnetic charge, the repulsion between electrons, we measure it, it's always the exact same number. And the idea is that these are constants of nature. These are built into the fabric of our universe. And scientists, this is what Feynman is charged, is to say, how do we explain numbers like this? What's the cause of that? We're always looking to explain the cause, going back and back and back and back. And in a certain sense, physicists hit a wall. How do we explain numbers? Numbers seem to elude any deeper understanding, deeper explanation. And this is what he's calling one of the greatest mysteries of all physics.
Right. I'll just say for this group, I know you understand this. When we speak about this to non-Jews or people who haven't learned any Torah, so you can't really give this example. But in halacha, you have shiurim or halacha Moshe Sinai. So for example, I tell you have to have a sukkah. Okay, so sukkah has to have walls, it has to have schach. There's certain qualitative things that schach has to be made of. It grows from the ground, not makabel tumah. But then there's shiurim, is how big is a wall? So it's 10 tvachim. How do you explain that? It's halacha Moshe Sinai. You can't. It's an axiomatic thing that's posited. So it comes out in physics. There's something similar, which is a fascinating parallel, that there's these 25 numbers that are in a sense axioms. They're 25 numbers. Where do they come from? And physicists don't like that. It's what's the sense of that? It's just that's the search of the fundamental basis of all reality. They're searching for a theory of everything. It comes out these qualitative, beautiful laws, general relativity, quantum mechanics, and 25 numbers, random numbers. So that's the mystery. Call it the mystery of. And so the solution to the mystery, so this was in the 1980s, Feynman was discussing this. And basically what was discovered in the latter half of really towards the end of the 20th century, was something called fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is this idea that there's a solution to the mystery of where these numbers come from. It was found out that if you change these numbers by a little bit, then you don't get atoms, and you don't get molecules, and you don't get planets and stars and galaxies and life. And it comes out that those numbers matter. And so instead of being 1 over 137, it's 139 or 134, the whole universe doesn't work. And those numbers, you have a universe with electrons running around, but you don't have any atoms, you don't have any stars. So it turns out that, at least 10 of these numbers are very critically fine-tuned in a small number. The one that had the biggest impact on scientists, physicists, was in 1998. They discovered something called the cosmological constant, which determines the expansion rate of the universe after the Big Bang, how quickly it expands. And it's fine-tuned to, it's at least 90 decimal places. It's just astounding. That's really about around 120 decimal places. It's a tiny number. If it was a little bit bigger, smaller, the universe expands too quickly without ever forming any galaxies, or just collapses right away. And you just get, after the Big Bang, it collapses, you don't get anything. And that's really what shook physicists and showed them that it can't be just any chance. And the question was, how do you interpret this, that these numbers are set for the purpose of bringing about atoms and stars and molecules, a whole complex, structured, and ordered universe? That's really fine-tuning. And the question is, what's the interpretation of that? What's the philosophical interpretation of it? Physicists say it's a multiverse. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. Hopefully it'll come up, okay? And then when we say the natural explanation of when you have something done for a purpose is you say that's an intelligent cause, that the cause of the constants, the cause that set the constants, made it 1 over 137, did it for a purpose. There's a reason why, the Torah says that a wall is 10 tvachim, not 100 tvachim, or not 1 tefach. There's a purpose, because that's around the right size. It could have been 11 or 9, fine. Rambam talks about the Moreh Nevuchim. Can't ask exactly the specific numbers. Okay, 137.1 or 2, it doesn't matter, but you can see a range, a certain range is intelligently selected, because if it was out of that range, it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't accomplish its purpose. If God wanted a complex universe, he's trying to produce existence, not just people, but stars and planets and galaxies and everything, the whole great wonders of the universe. And that to us is what we think is the natural interpretation. We argue for this. We develop it more philosophically, more rigidly on Physics to God podcast, but that's the general overview of the fine-tuning argument.
It's a very good overview. And what I'm going to do is actually later on in the description, I'm going to put the link to the podcast so everyone can go away and listen to it in detail. I think the fine-tuning argument essentially is I would say an older argument for the existence of a creator. What would you say are some of the arguments that we can grab from contemporary understanding of science for the existence of a creator?
Okay, so it's really new. It's the fine-tuning argument. It's literally the last 25 years where this has become a big thing. You think you
wouldn't consider that old in the scientific world?
I don't think there's anything really better than that in the past 25 years. It's far and away
it's quite a solid argument.
It's the most compelling argument. It really is, and just the way you see that it's a real argument. I just point out one thing is a lot of people do it from biology. They do design of biology in animals. It's called intelligent design. We don't speak about that. We don't do it there. And the way just the short thing is the competing scientific theory in biology is evolution, natural selection, Darwinian evolution, biology. That's a real scientific theory. A lot of people don't like it and they have problems, but it's science.
Rabbi Dweck considers it Maaseh Bereshit. It's
exactly.
It's not something you believe in. It is reality.
Correct. We like it too. We're fans, but whether it's comprehensive, it's complete, whatever, different story. But the competing scientific theory is the multiverse to this. That's the way scientists answer. And that's, again, the multiverse, it ends up being an infinite number of universes that are unobservable, parallel universes where everything happens. It's a completely different theory. It should show you that fine-tuning is a real problem if scientists have to say a multiverse in order to explain it.
Right. That's one thing which is new. If you're asking what's new, is that as time goes on longer and longer, more and more physicists are adhering to a multiverse, are believing in infinitely many parallel universes where anything and everything possible happens. And we just happen to be in the one lucky universe where everything just works out perfectly right. And the fact that that's what is new is that this problem of fine-tuning, they're discovering more and more fine-tuning, and it's becoming clear there's no other way to explain fine-tuning. It's a real problem for physicists. The only other way to explain it, instead of saying there's one God who designed our one, fine-tuned and designed our one ordered amazing universe, you have to say there's many universes, chaos everywhere, and this happens to just be by chance the one lucky thing. So with time, modernity is showing how compelling this argument is. As you see more, the greatest physicists are all believing in this, something as amazing, which sounds like science fiction, something like the multiverse.
Understood. Okay, so where we've essentially addressed, I would say, modern day arguments of God from science. If we now move on to, sorry, go ahead.
We have two on our podcast. The last 5 episodes, we do 2 more arguments.
Okay.
I don't want to go into it now, but we think there's 3 total. But we think fine-tuning is the strongest one. So.
What are the names of the other 2?
The one of them is from the qualitative design of the laws themselves.
Okay.
And the third one is from the low entropy initial conditions of the Big Bang. Okay. That's the incredible order in the very Big Bang itself, and it's the entropy. It's more complex a little bit.
Yeah.
But we discussed those 2 also in our podcast.
That's a teaser. You should just cut this out and make it a teaser for the podcast. I'm looking forward to it. Let's move on to Yechud Hashem, the unity of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. I know you mentioned you studied physics. Your expertise, Rav Zimmer, is more in maths. How would you say the study of physics, especially the concept of a unified universe, connects with the idea of Yechud Hashem?
Okay, so there's really 2 directions. I'll talk about one of them and Aaron can talk about the other. And I guess when you talk about Yechud Hashem, you could mean one of 2 things, or maybe more, but ironically speaking. Like Rashi talks about on the pasuk, he says it means like the reference like that that the world will recognize Hakadosh Baruch Hu as the one and only cause of everything else. And in a certain sense, there's like a move from old paganism and polytheism towards unity, and that is that the idea to primitives looked like diverse and everything's different. Then you see lightning and you see thunder and you see the water and you see the sun. And you say, there's a lightning god, there's a thunder god, there's the sun god, there's the Nile god, there's all these different gods. And the diversity of the universe, when you're looking to explain it or to get to wield its power, you kind of invent all these different gods to be able to deal with all the diverse forces in the universe. And as science is developing, is in a certain sense, I think Einstein has this quote, is like the goal of science is to reduce the apparent complexity of our universe into the most simple, basic components. And the success of science has been to show how, despite all the various substance of our universe, everything reduces to these fundamental particles, and all the various interactions in the universe reduce to these basic simple.
In all the complexity, there is a simplicity.
Exactly. And that points to the idea of one cause of everything. And you no longer have to say there's a lightning god, there's a thunder god, everything is unified under one set of laws. And that points to the fact that there's one common origin. And that's the idea of the Hashem Echad. And that's slowly with time, the world, science is pointing in that direction of unity. Now, the scientists are still, they're looking for a unified law, but ultimately it all goes back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Yeah, and I think it actually ties in with an idea that Chacham Yaakov Anatoli states, then Abarbanel and Rabbi Sachs more recently, Alav Shalom, about Yechud Hashem can be seen from the 10 plagues, as you mentioned, the polytheistic conception of reality. Chacham Faur, one of the Alav Shalom, one of the great teachers of in our tradition, he explains that the polytheistic conception of reality sees the world as disjointed categories of reality.
Right.
So you've got to go to this, you go to that, you go to this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Pesukim relating to the 10 plagues says, they're going to know me. They will know me. They will know me in relation to the 10 plagues. And what we suddenly have is these 10 plagues occurring, all encroaching upon Egyptian conceptions of reality. They thought there were different gods for different realms. Abarbanel, as you know, quoting the Midrash, saying that why was it the Nile first? Because that was the god of the Nile. Why was the Nile first attacked? Because that was the god of the Nile. And that, Chacham Faur, Rabbi Sachs presents it as, it was shattering their conceptions of polytheism, realizing that there is one unified source, this Yechud Hashem behind it all. And ultimately, that is what provided science to develop, allowed science to develop. I think it was Robert Fuller, the physicist, who said that monotheism is the theological counterpart of the scientist, because you cannot develop fundamental science anyway in a polytheistic through a polytheistic lens of reality. There's a great book by, I think it was Cambridge University Press, that brought out about how the influence of monotheism on science, and you see how the evidence brought there that actually all fundamental science was essentially developed in monotheistic civilizations. There were scientific discoveries in polytheistic societies, but fundamental science at its core, you can only come to that understanding if you accept that it all goes back to that one source and everything is under a unified set of laws. So that's fascinating to hear how that's, I'm sure you've come across that many times. It's no chidush.
For sure. Okay, there's one more aspect, because before you can't leave Yichud Hashem, you got to.
No, absolutely.
That's the yesod of it all. So that's we were discussing, like Rashi, the idea of Yichud Hashem. Not to the exclusion. Rashi holds by what I'm about to say also. When the Rambam presents the mitzvah of Yichud Hashem, it's the idea that God himself has no parts. He's one from every side, from every angle. There's no way to break him down. The scientific term would be absolutely simple. He's absolutely simple. He has no complexity whatsoever. And that's what we discuss a little bit, that there's a polytheistic philosophy where it's not just you have many gods, but then there's still a polytheistic framework where you reduce, like, for example, people say the first monotheistic society was Egyptian. They believed in one sun god. That's not where you believe in one sun god. That's not monotheism. That's a polytheistic belief system where you instead of having 7 or 6 or 5, you happen to have one, but it's the same thought. You have one complex God. The true idea of monotheism, which is the basis of all science, the Yesodos Chachmos, is the idea of one absolutely simple God. And that really emerges from science. We call that from the intuition of simplicity. Is scientists say this? They're looking for the one of the most amazing things about modern science, physics in particular, I would say perhaps, is that as scientists learn more and more about it, they find that it's more unified. And you had electricity and magnetism used to be two separate forces. They turned out they're unified through electromagnetism as one simple force. Space and time used to be separate thing. Relativity unified them to this thing called space-time. Optics used to be separate from electromagnetism. That also came through Maxwell's equations. And it goes on and on. Newton did it with gravity, the moon and the orbits of the heavens with the gravity on Earth. He unified them to one universal law of gravitation. It's something that's been going on throughout the entire history of modern physics to this day, is this process of simplification and unification, and showing how everything really becomes simpler and simpler and points to one ultimate idea.
Ultimately taking us to the grand theory of everything.
Right, but now BC scientists want that grand theory of everything to be one complex equation with an equal sign and two parts. They want it to be very simple, but still to be able to understand it with their minds. They could grasp it. If it has parts, you can understand it. You know what I mean? You can understand it with your intellect. Can have shlita, have control and dominance over it if you can understand it with your mind. If it's complex. The true idea of an absolutely simple existence is not something that a person can grasp by breaking it down into simpler parts. But the reality of science is, if we see that the deeper you go in reality, when you get to the more fundamental layers, it gets simpler and simpler. The complexity goes away. And from the greatest simplicity comes this incredible diversity and complexity. So that's what we would also say is how physics and the whole process of the development of this physical sciences really points to this idea that at the bedrock of reality is something that's absolutely simple and not something complex.
Beautiful, beautifully put. So I think you've answered the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because I think it's to be asked. When we're hearing these things, we can see the profound impact it can have on our understanding, not of just reality, but appreciation for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his Torah. So how would you, or what would you say, are the main ways that studying these things, studying this enterprise that is science, can aid someone in their Torah learning? And we know that many people have expressed that there are concerns or dangers. As Rabbi Norman Lamb said, knowledge is like love. They can both be dangerous, but we don't stop loving. So what would you say specifically for you, how it's aided you in your learning and living of Torah, studying these things, and how you think on a broader scale it can impact Am Yisrael?
Right. So I'll just talk about one point, which is, as the Rambam describes, the mitzvah of Avas Hashem and of Yiras Hashem, is that he says when a person studies the amazing, wondrous beauty and wisdom in found throughout the universe, then he's drawn and desires and seeks out the source of this great wisdom. And that's like, as he describes, is like an ava, a love. And then when he looks back at himself and he sees how small he is as compared to the great wisdom in the universe, he's filled with awe. And that's the way the Rambam describes the mitzvah of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And he describes at the end of Hilchos Tshuva also, a person should devote time to be able to study the knowledge in the universe, to see that which is Modian Lo Eskono, that which reveals to him his creator. And I think the more, when a person studies science, and in my experience, has been, the more you study the universe, you see the wisdom in the universe. Specifically, as the science we discuss in Physics to God, specifically fine-tuning, but everything in physics, in any area, whether it be studying medicine or studying chemistry or astronomy or wherever, any walk of science, you see the great wisdom which is manifest throughout the universe. And it's amazing. And just like we said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is like, he created the universe and he gave us the Torah. And in a certain sense, God's the author of both of them. And we can study the way great wisdom. In fact, I think in the Sefer HaMitzvot, he talks about the mitzvah of Avas Hashem. He talks also about learning Torah. So he's still learning Torah and studying the universe. And through seeing the great wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through seeing specifically fine-tuning and seeing how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created these perfect laws and how these laws have specific quantities, and the way the universe started off in this low entropy initial conditions, it all comes together and you see the unbelievable wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it draws the person to be able to seek out and to know more. And it's similar to this experience of Talmud Torah. When you study Hashem's Torah, you see the great wisdom and you see this is unbelievable. I want to understand more and more and more. And it creates a sense of love, and it creates a sense of humility. When you look at yourself in the context of this great wisdom, you recognize your place in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in the cosmic order of the Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Absolutely. Go ahead. You were.
No, I would say just another thing, but you want to say anything, Sina, or?
No, it's just hearing it presented that way it reminds me of the pasuk in Job, where it says, "From my flesh I see Hakadosh Baruch Hu," and I remember in my anatomy classes, which was a whole thing in and of itself because I'm a Kahen. That was really the moment when I was starting to realize, beyond just traditional upbringing of being Yirat Shamayim and loving Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that actually that experience of people thought going to study biomedical sciences at university, you're off, it's finished, it's game over, we've lost him, he's gone.
Off the bat.
But suddenly I came out, a radical Jew because I essentially, I gave context to the traditional upbringing and started to see Torah and Hakadosh Baruch Hu in a totally different light. So that humility that you mentioned was definitely something. Suddenly I realized that, oh, okay, maybe I don't have it all figured out. And we as humans don't have it all figured out. There's something there. So no, I totally hear that. But let's talk about the dangers. I think, it's important to touch on that. It is one of the questions as well that I wanted to address, which is that we have seen, for all intents and purposes, especially since the Enlightenment in certain circles, I would say now is pretty much a mainstream position, that there isn't a place for this. We have obviously many of the Hachamim. I'm lucky to be of a tradition where I've always seen considered them sisters, Torah and science. But there are concerns, and whether we want to call the other side or not, they have concerns that are valid concerns. So what would you say are those dangers, and how would you recommend we strike the right balance? Before you say, I just wanted to present a couple of ideas that I've had around this, and I'm keen to hear a more experienced and expert opinion on it. But for me, I've seen it in this way. Fundamentally, I think the major concern since the Enlightenment was, especially amongst, I would say, more Ashkenazi circles, because there wasn't the scientific giant in the Ashkenazi tradition during the Rishonic era, that when the Enlightenment occurred, Ashkenazi communities were, for all intents and purposes, on a roller coaster of rationality and logic that they had never been on before. They never had any Rishonim that had dealt with these things before. And therefore, when you don't have predecessors that have dealt with these questions, not necessarily in the same way, because we can't compare Ibn Sina with Kant, they had major differences, but still, they hadn't had their knives sharpened on, Enlightenment ideas of rationality and logic beforehand. That's why I think we had within the Ashkenazi world more of that. You're either in or out when it comes to science and philosophy. And then you had obviously Reform, Orthodox, etc., etc. Whereas in the Sephardi world, by then already, I think it lost that classical Sephardi tradition, because we have now left the golden age of Andalusia, where you had intellectualism, and we started seeing Kabbalah come in and influence or kind of fill that vacuum of science as a description of reality. But we still had, especially with the Spanish and Portuguese tradition, Hachamim who had those rabbis that they could stand on the shoulders of, that dealt with these questions, or at least in that milieu of science and rationality and logic. And as a result, now we are in this scenario where the mainstream, for all intents and purposes, has taken that former approach where it was either or. Obviously, you had Rav Hirsch and others, and now one would argue that actually it's in the Ashkenazi world that classical Sephardi approach, that Geonic approach is upheld in many ways, where you've got this Torah Mada, which I still think is very different, quite different to that Geonic Sephardi approach of, because it's still compartmentalized as Torah and Mada, whereas we don't have that. It's all one. But still, you still have a sense for that Torah and science approach within an Ashkenazi world more than you have in today's mainstream Sephardi world. But I think the dangers are, that you didn't necessarily have in the years after the Enlightenment a very solid. The concern was that there wouldn't be a very solid Torah foundation. And therefore, if you don't have Torah as a lens through which to deal with science, science can take you to many, many places. And Radak writes beautifully that actually, as others have done, that you've got to have the meat and potatoes of Torah before one can enjoy the tastes of worldly wisdoms. So that's kind of my little take on it all. I'm keen to hear what you perceive as being some of the dangers and why you think we are where we are and how we can strike a right balance.
Okay. It's a lot there.
I've given you a lot. I'm sorry.
Okay. So let's take out, we'll first take out the dangers of science. And then maybe afterwards, if you remember, discuss the dangers of not doing science, because there's consequences of not doing science. But so you're right, the Ashkenazic world, I mean, by me, for Ashkenazic world to me means in the Rishonic era, it means Rashi and Tosos, France and Germany. I know how
I mean, the Rosh as well. The Rosh, having visited Spain, he said,
Rosh,
God saved me from this secular knowledge that I came across.
There's a Rosh like
you
that.
guys would be kicked out of Ashkenazi yeshivot in those days. We would be in Andalus. You would find a home.
There's definitely,
Thank you.
For sure, huge difference. And like the reality is that there was when in the 1700s, I mean, probably much more in the 1800s, that was really the century. It just, secular knowledge and the results, the consequences of the Enlightenment, it devastated the Jewish people. It wasn't because there was this fear that science is going to be dangerous to people. It was Jews abandoned the Torah in droves, and it was a real consequence that people reacted to. It wasn't just a made up one. And I think it's and the question was how to stop that, how to protect the Jewish people from this. And I think the things have changed significantly in the past couple hundred years, where we've learned to, let me take a step back here, is you have to distinguish between a contradiction, a conflict that comes between science and the Yesodei Hadas and the foundations of the religion. Like in the Rambam's time, it would be between the eternity of the universe and the Torah. The Rambam says if the universe is eternal, then miracles are impossible, divine providence is impossible. And that really is it. Then the Torah is, if the universe is eternal in the way the Rambam conceived of it in Aristotle, then the Torah is really false. And that's a real problem.
He was willing to change it. He said, if we were to prove it conclusively.
Okay. He says that's the second issue. The second issue is conflicts between the Torah, the literal interpretation of the text, and science. Where the Torah said, Bereshis bara Elokim, the world is created, and if that contradicts science, if they prove the eternal universe, then you could reinterpret that. But that you could always. And we don't know exactly how to read the Torah. We use our minds based upon what we know, and we interpret it. And it could be in a later generation we'll have certain insights in science, and we'll have to. That's the Rambam, and he would interpret it non-literally. But if on a fundamental level you can't, if the universe is eternal, I don't want to get too far into ancient philosophy. We know the universe isn't anymore, but if the universe is eternal, then you can't reinterpret the Torah in terms of the text. There's a fundamental contradiction. That's a real problem.
Like you can't have Nisim and you can't have Ashkacha, you can't have Sina.
It's not a question of changing the text. It's a question of it's impossible to have miracles. But I think that's not the case. But my point is nowadays you don't have any fundamental contradictions between science and the Torah. I don't believe there's anything in the foundations of the religion. Most of the problems people have is because they don't know is interpreting the text. People are very committed to a literal interpretation. For example, the most classic 6 days, they want to read a 6 24-hour periods. Yes, you're going to have a problem like that. If you want to learn it as completely literal, those types of problems. And scientists who are very atheistic, they attack religion and they attack Christian Bibles, which spills over to Jews. And that's where a tremendous amount of this conflict comes between Jews associated with Christians in terms of, and they learn to take the Torah literally from Christian influence. Maybe Ashkenazic Jews were more influenced on that in that way. And scientists and religious people have a conflict about the text, literal text, which is not really from a Rambam perspective, it's not really a problem at all. If you can take the Torah literally, you do. If you can't, then you have to reinterpret it, you do. And the conflict between science and Torah on a fundamental level, I don't think really exists. And or at least I think can be understood in a deep way, and it can be revealing how to understand the Torah. So that's what I would say is to try to answer your question is, yes, there was a period of time of danger time. 1800s were awful.
Yeah.
20th century wasn't that much better. But I do think that nowadays there is a way to handle the dangers.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think we have to sharply differentiate between science and scientists. Okay? Science is done by scientists, and you can have great scientists. Science itself doesn't create any problems with Torah. The problem is that scientists are people, and people have their own beliefs, and they come to conclusions which are beyond the science itself. So, for example, the greatest scientist, Albert Einstein, when his theory led him to the prediction that the universe was expanding, he said something like he doesn't want to consider that because he's afraid of the implications that would be. And that is that if the universe is expanding, if you go back in time, then it turns out there's a beginning and there's and he didn't, because that he introduced something called the cosmological constant to, so to speak, create a stable universe. And that idea is that, but that was a mistake. He called that the biggest blunder of his life, because there was a Hubble observed actually that the universe was expanding, and his theory would have predicted the fact that the universe is expanding. But my point is that as great of a scientist as he was, he had a bias, which is he didn't want to consider the implications of an expanding universe, what that would mean. That points to the idea of the beginning. So there's no greater scientist than Einstein, but nevertheless, he had a bias which crept in.
Even he was subject to human nature.
Exactly. And nowadays it's much worse. You have scientists like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking.
Where it's theological. It's become ideological. I mean, it's
right. But it's because they go beyond the science itself.
Absolutely.
And they take philosophical, the book God Delusion, or they become philosophers, and they're not trained as philosophers, and they have a strong influence on people. And especially when young people study scientists and they value scientists and they see the great scientist, Richard Dawkins is a great biologist. But then when you start trusting him as a philosopher, as someone who shapes your view on the world, that's where it gets the problem. So I think it's important for us to be able to study science and appreciate the wisdom that science provides us, but at the same time not to become too attached to the people of the scientists. People of scientists, as we will talk about, they believe in a multiverse. They believe in infinitely many parallel universes. And it's valuable to break down the esteem, to show the fact that scientists believe in things which sound crazy. And we're gonna present season 2 of our podcast of Physics to God. We're gonna take apart multiverse and show its flaws and deal with it in a rigorous way. But the point is that great scientists aren't infallible, for sure, and they bring to the table their biases, and they're willing to believe in crazy things. And it's important to study science, but not to become fixed to scientists. You have to be fixed to our Baalei HaMasorah and learn from them, but they don't have necessarily cutting edge science. So we have to be able to put together the knowledge of the Torah and of our Masorah together with the cutting edge science, but not becoming too attached to the people of the scientists.
And I think it comes back to the need for teachers that are well versed and have their expertise in both of these realms, such as yourselves. I think fundamentally the issue that I remember I had when I was younger, the parents that were concerned about their children learning science, it was a concern that the teacher has exactly those ideological biases that you're describing. They are real concerns.
Yes.
But fundamentally, something needs to change whereby we have Bet Midrash or yeshivot, and there are those that exist, but more in the mainstream, that are actually training people to be more like the 2 rabbis I'm speaking with, where they are able to actually portray Torah and science, and have this parents trust that actually this science is being taught through the lens of Torah.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Just one thing is everybody very often discusses the dangers of science and things like that. There's a tremendous danger of not learning science when you have an uneducated rabbinate, and kids are curious and they ask questions and they want to know. They saw something, and there's the internet nowadays, and they're gonna some Jews are completely insulated and they don't see the rest of the world, and even that's becoming more difficult for the Haredi community to hide from influence and knowledge, and the internet exists even for them to some degree. But for the Jews that do interact with the secular world, is you have to know how to respond to these questions that kids ask. And for you to just, if rabbis don't know good answers, and there are good answers out there, and rabbis are just uneducated, or if they say a foolish answer, and the kid sees through it, and, a high school kid is going to say, this is dumb, you're saying foolish things to defend your religion, you must not have a good answer. Even though the good answers do exist, the rabbi doesn't know it, and you lose the best and the brightest kids because they just think you're saying nonsense. Mm-hmm. And they go off to a secular college because they want to pursue something that's real and something true. And it's a tremendous drain on the Jewish community to lose these kids. And it's a danger. Dal mal hashav lapikoris is a real principle in Judaism. Absolutely. And yes, maybe not every single person in Klal Yisrael needs to learn science. It's not necessarily for everybody. But the Gedolim, the greatest people in our Masorah nowadays, they should know science. They shouldn't be ignorant. The people who learned the most Gemara, the most Tanakh, and they're able to understand Torah on the highest level, the philosophy of Torah, they should be capable. They're bright enough. They should be capable of studying science, and then they can present it. They can be the rabbis teaching the other rabbis and teaching the kids the proper way to interpret science with the Torah. And it shouldn't be left up to kids to figure out science on their own. The intellectual rabbis should be the ones who know science and can present it in a way to the rest of the Jewish people that's Absolutely. A beneficial thing for them.
Absolutely. I would argue it's not just for the rabbis, for everybody. And Rabbi Yosef Kafech, alav shalom, says that if one doesn't study these things, they end up worshipping their imagination.
Right.
And you are suddenly talking about, as you've said, the dangers of going through a slippery slope, and suddenly you could be a very well-intentioned Obdei Avodah Zarah. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but yeah, we sometimes think about the benefits of studying science, but we don't talk about the dangers of not studying it.
Yes.
And it reminds me of the introduction to Harambam's letter on Techiyat HaMetim. He outlines why he wrote the Mishneh Torah and why he wrote the Ikarim. And he chastises what he considers Torah sages of the time, who were cholei nefashot, sick souls, or the Art Scroll translated it quite nicely as degenerates, who don't necessarily have. The reason why they had the issue with the things that he was saying was because they understood the give and take of the Talmud. Art Scroll translated as they were Talmudists, but they weren't aware of worldly wisdom. And that's why they found issues with the Ikarim. And obviously in the Hakdama to Perek Chelek, Harambam talks about the majority in the first group who understand Agadata literally. He calls them miskenim, and he says the reason why they are the way that they are with regards to taking these things so literally is because they are not well versed in the sciences. So suddenly it's gone from, of course, Da'at Hashem being the main reason, but actually to understand the non-legal aspects of the Talmud, and to understand the Ikarim, and to understand the purpose of the Mishneh Torah, which is for all intents and purposes the restatement of the national law of Israel. These things are necessary. These things are needed. So I think it's relevant for everybody. We've only got a few minutes left. I would go on for another 5 hours. It was at 9:30 p.m. and I had a wife who promised me that I would stop on time. But I do want to touch on, I think the multiverse question, I think we're going to have to do that. I want that on the podcast. So we're going to have to advertise that like crazy once it's ready. And I'm going to push it on all the Chabura channels so everyone can hear it properly. It's essentially understanding the multiverse argument and seeing if it is modern day Avodah Zarah and what is a critical examination of it by two rabbi scientists. So I'm excited for that. But I do want to finish off with this question. We talk about Harambam a lot, obviously. He was, one thing that bothers me though is that, people think Harambam was this innovator. People think that Harambam was this anomaly. He was this standout character that wasn't the same as everyone else around him. But something we're trying to do, obviously with Chabura, is to the English-speaking world, present Hachmei Andalus and the Geonim that preceded them, and to show that this Maimonidean approach wasn't Maimonidean, it was Geonic Andalusian. And there are many Hachamim who drunk from the same wells that Harambam did. And essentially what Harambam did, which I think many of the Hachamim of the tradition did, is present the eternity of the Torah not as a dogma of, oh yeah, the Torah is eternal, but by, as Hacham Faor states, by couching and presenting eternal Torah ideas in contemporary language. Hacham Faor held that that is what eternity of Torah means. It's not this belief that the Torah is eternal and that's it, the Torah is eternal. It's an active, not a passive exercise. It's an active exercise for the people of our generation, the Hachamim of our generation, to see what is the contemporary language of the time. Harambam, when he wrote the Moreh Nebuchim, it was Aristotelian science. That, a lot of it is outdated. But what Harambam was doing, and I think that's where people mistake saying he's Aristotelian, was that he was couching these Torah ideas in Aristotelian terms, because that was the language of the time through which people can understand these older, pre-Aristotelian ideas. So I want to ask you, what can we, as, Dat Hashem seeking Jews, do to maintain that objective of eternity of Torah, of couching these Torah ideas in conventional language? And who are those Hachamim, other than yourselves, who are doing this that you would recommend the audience to follow?
It's amazing seeing the first time we met you now, but it's amazing, kindred spirits here. So yeah, I completely agree. On a personal level, when I was younger, I read the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim, and as I studied more science, I became very frustrated on a personal level with the Rambam, because so much of it was like it's the active intellect. It's so essential to his philosophy and his theory of prophecy, of nevuah and hashkafa pratis, and it was just I wasn't capable of extricating Aristotelian philosophy from the Rambam's metaphysical worldview. And for years, I put the Rambam on the side. He was my friend. I put him on the side. I was more involved in Rashi and the Ramban and their way of looking at things. And then maybe about 10 years ago, I came back to the Rambam. And my knowledge of science had increased, and my knowledge of philosophy had increased, and also learning how to think through training my mind in Gemara. And I hope we've been much more successful in understanding the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim and his Mishnah Torah. And I love the way you said it. It's people don't know this. Is exactly right. Is the Rambam's was trying to formulate the theory of the Torah within modern science. It's just his modern science was Aristotle. Our modern science is not Aristotle, it's modern science, what we call modern science. And you can't be an Aristotelian nowadays. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody would be an Aristotelian. The Rambam would not be an Aristotelian nowadays. The Ramban would not be either. None of them would.
He would chastise you if you were an Aristotelian.
It's crazy. Of course they would. It's not chachma. No, they would never do that. And it's very difficult. You have to really know science and to do that. And I would say is that, I know you're waiting for part 2, season 2 of the multiverse. We're doing that. Season 3, we're going to do about Yichud Hashem. This entire separate series about Yichud Hashem. And we're going to show how the categories of modern science, how physicists deal with fundamental laws, how they deal with fundamental actions, and how they deal with the same categories of physics, how those, when you use those categories and apply them to analogously to God and to Yichud Hashem. And we're going to show you how, certain categories you have to change a little bit from the way the Rambam did it, because there are differences. But largely we're going to try to do that in the framework of Yichud Hashem and show how these same categories, in a sense, physics will be a mashal for metaphysics. So it'll be a little bit more abstract than our season 1 or season 2, certainly. But we're in fact, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to, and we're not raw to do. We're not on the level to do it. But there's nobody's doing it. No, but we don't have a Rambam anymore. That's the problem. We don't have anybody with that mind in Torah and science that exists anymore. So we're just trying to do it personally for ourselves and sharing what we have, but trying to, so to speak, update the Moreh Nevuchim. Try to work out what we can through the framework of modern science and modern philosophy, which is consistent with the Torah and explains the Torah. And we're starting with God and Yichud Hashem, but that is the foundation upon which you can base a theory of divine providence or a theory of prophecy and things like that. This is the foundation, what we're starting with. And that's We're gonna do that in season 3, but absolutely that's dear to our heart, the entire plan and what we want to accomplish.
Right. And if you do know, we're not familiar with other people who are doing this, but we'd love to, if you could put us in touch with them.
Just look at the Chabura roster. Go to chabura.com/about. They're all there now. There's many others. But no, it's to do it on the way that you're doing it and actually dedicating time and hours in podcasts. And please God, I'm pressuring you. It needs to be a book. I think there are very few and far between.
This podcast, just it's not a regular podcast. We put out an episode every week. We've been writing a book for 12 years. We've never published this book. What we've done is we've taken a book and we turned it into a podcast. So it's not a regular podcast. It has 12 years of thought behind it. Books are much better than podcasts in general, because a person spends years of their life coming with ideas in a book. So our podcast is based upon 10 to 12 years of thinking about these topics, rewriting them over and over and over. And this podcast, like for example, season 1, it's 10 episodes. We haven't released an episode in over a year. Season 2 will be 15 episodes, and it's going to be probably another year or so before we do a 3rd season. It's a different type of a podcast. You should think of it as like a audio version of what the book will be. Hopefully, if
like a course.
Yeah, it's a course. It's going to be 3 courses. Essentially, it's 3 courses. We released the first series. The second will be Multiverse of Theory, will be about Yichud Hashem.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to pushing it out on all our channels, and everyone listening to this recording will know about it. And I think this is a fantastic way to end. I am so grateful for your time. I feel enriched. I feel motivated and inspired, as I'm sure many others do. Before we go, I might just say, if anybody's got any questions, if you want to leave it in the chat, or go ahead and put your hand up, your digital hand. If not, you've got about 1 minute to do so. If not, then what we will do is we will take the discussion to our Q&A. We've got a Q&A group on our WhatsApp. We have a community of over 2,000 people on our WhatsApp. It's one of the communities you don't want to join because it's non-stop buzzing. So I won't add you to it unless you want to be. We've got one question here. Alexander Ermakov, you can unmute.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Just a short question about the very first part of today. At some point, my question was about renormalization and regularization of the fundamental constants, the what's in general called running constants by the physicists. So the number you mentioned is 1/137, where you quoted Feynman and his arguments. Well, if you work at CERN or do particle physics, sometimes this number becomes 1/128. And the fundamental constants do change. They run. They have a dynamics to them. How does that fit in with the fine-tuning argument and the other considerations you mentioned?
Okay, so that's a very advanced question. You must be some sort of physicist. I think you're referring to something called like grand unified theories that were very popular in the 70s and 80s, where they tried to unify all these constants through running constants and showing how when energies are higher, the values changed, and the hope was they would be unified at some specific number. And that would work for the 3 force constants. It wouldn't work for any of the masses or anything else. Ultimately, grand unified theories don't work because we know protons don't decay, and for various other reasons. But in theory, even if whatever the number would be, whatever the true value would be, even if it wasn't over 137 or 100, even if it 1 over 1 over 10, whatever it is, where does that number come from? The mystery still exists. When Feynman was speaking about this, I think in 1985, he knew about grand unified theories. They were around. They were very popular in the early 80s. And the problem is just still, how do you explain a number on is it fundamental, truly has no cause, or is there some deeper cause? And if there is, how do you explain it? And he talks about trying to explain it through mathematical constants like pi and e. So it's an excellent question you ask. We actually address at the very end of episode 10. It's a very sophisticated, advanced question. But I mean, ultimately, it doesn't solve the mystery of the constants. Listen to the episodes, but there's a big difference between the mystery of how you explain a number versus fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is a totally different thing. It's the solution. But the mystery of the constants, we did it quickly. That's why it's very conceptual, is the mystery is how do you explain a number. Fine-tuning is a solution, explaining the number by a teleological cause. So that's a quick answer.
Great
Sorry.
question.
Lot.
And I'm looking forward to the episode that addresses that. On that, I shall bid you all farewell. Thank you all so much.
Sina, I just want to
Yes.
express our appreciation. It's really a pleasure to be able to talk with a like-minded type of students of Torah and of Kadosh Baruch
It
Hu.
warms our heart to hear you. It makes us feel good. It's nice to
this
talk.
will, please God, be the first of many
Yeah.
times we meet, and please God, we're going to have you on our curriculum. You need to
Okay.
start thinking of series that you're willing to give to us, because as you'll see from our website, we have a curriculum, weekly curriculum in person as well as live on Zoom. So yeah, this is not a goodbye, it's a see you later, as they say. I think that's an American phrase, right? That's an American phrase.
Sure, yeah.
Just some housekeeping before we go to all listening to the recording. Obviously, we've got the Yamim Noraim and Rosh Hashanah coming up. We have our new book on the Yamim Noraim that is available on Amazon. If you're hearing this recording before Rosh Hashanah, you've got a few days left. So get your copy. We have continued the tradition of translating essays from Hachamim of the past, including essays written by Hachamim of the present, our teachers, and Hachamim of the future, by including essays from our students. So we are very happy with this new companion series for the Moadim, and really looking forward to a new year with all the students and all the teachers, and please God, with Rabbi Feder and Rabbi Zimmer in the near future. Wishing you all a Shavua Tov.
It's great to meet you. Thank you very much.